Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. This is one session of several that are organized by the Council of Independent Colleges. We're here to highlight the role of independent colleges in educational innovation and offer a sense of pressing opportunities in our sector. Also, I think I've kind of observed in this conference, we're, for the first time, a bit of a disruptor. You don't usually think of independent colleges being that in education. You think of it as more traditional, but here it looks like we're offering some different ideas. Let me quickly welcome our speakers today. Montserrat Fuentes, who's president of St. Edward's University in Texas. Krista Newkirk, who's president of Redlands University here in California. And Glena Temple, who's president of Dominican University in Illinois. I'm Jeff Woods. I am the Director of Presidential Engagement for the Council of Independent Colleges. I'm a moderator for this discussion. Our conversation this afternoon is about serving Hispanic students and really thinking about Hispanic student populations as a population of choice. Particularly for our sector. So let's start by talking a little bit about what it means to serve Hispanic students in your universities. Let's start with Monse. Can you tell us about the current Hispanic student demographic on your campus and kind of what your focus is in terms of serving Hispanic students?
Thank you, Jeff. And I'm excited to be here again. Montserrat Fuentes from Austin, Texas, St. Edward's University. St. Edward's, I have the privilege to be leading an institution that is a Hispanic-serving institution. And what that means is that at least 25% of our students are Hispanic. But for us, it's the identity, since the majority of our students are Hispanic Latino. And I want to highlight that because when we think about the Latino community, is the fastest growing demographic group in the nation. We're in California, and coming from Texas, New Mexico. In those states, actually, is the largest demographic group. And when we see the students graduating from high school, we already have more than 25% of our students graduating from high school that they are Latino. So the reality is that by default, our institutions of higher education should be Hispanic-serving institutions, but we are not there. And the reason is that those students, they are a higher academic risk for a lot of different reasons. Part of it is the lack of representation, being the first in their families to attend college. So the Hispanic-serving institutions, again, the designation is just based on the enrollment, not in really how we ensure that we are able to graduate these students. And as a result, we are seeing a significant gap in our graduation rates across the entire nation. So for us, it is our identity, and we are committed to serve those students, which requires significant intentionality to make sure that we help them to develop a sense of belonging. We help them to ensure that they see higher education as a good home for them. We retain them, we graduate them, and we help them to be more marketable. So we focus on outcomes, not just in welcoming them, that of course we do, and it's a great privilege to do so, but in just making sure that we get them all the way to the end.
So, Krista, can you tell us a little bit?
Sure. So the University of Redlands was designated as a Hispanic-serving institution just 2 years ago. And that's because we'd seen our population grow. So now we're 42% Hispanic-serving. But what's really interesting is what's happened the last few years in terms of our first-generation students. In 2018, our incoming class was 33% first-generation. In 2021, it was 48%. 33 to 48% in 3 years. I think if you did a Venn diagram, you'd see substantial overlap in those two populations, right? And so it's a work for us. There's the 4-quadrant scale you typically see in terms of if you look at culture on the bottom and you look at success of your students, right? And so if you have low culture and low enrollment, then your success or your Hispanic enrolling. If you have high or low enrollment but good culture, you're Hispanic enriching. If you have high outcomes and low culture, you're Hispanic producing, which is the category that the University of Redlands falls into right now. So our graduation rates, our retention rates for our Hispanic students are the same as our general student population. So we're trying to move over to that golden quadrant of Hispanic serving, and that's really where we're trying to enrich our culture on campus. And that is taking us some work and some digging, and I can share this now. We just got our letter that we've received our HSI grant that we think will really help us with that. And so that's a grant of $2.9 million over the next 5 years that will help us build upon our current programs and hopefully take us to that quadrant that we're trying to move into. Yeah.
Glena?
Sure, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. Dominican University is just outside of Chicago, and we have been designated as an HSI since 2012. Our entering freshman class is close to 70% Latin. Our overall student population is just over 50%, so with graduate students and transfer students lagging slightly in that demographic. So we are proud that we are officially in that HSI serving bucket, but that doesn't mean that we don't have work to do on our campus to improve our culture and our outcomes. We're really been trying to make the shift as a campus to talk about the assets that our student brings. Many of us who are older might know that when we went to college, we talked about the risks we bring as deficits. As a first-generation student, you're at risk, or you're from a low-income family, you're at risk. So we've been trying to change the narrative, although it's hard. It's swimming upstream to talk about the assets that someone brings who could be bilingual, or that resilience they've shown to be able to work and support these, and the assets their family brings to them. So that's a real cultural shift. It sounds pretty easy to talk about assets instead of deficits, but it's surprisingly harder than you think it would be. One example also that I'll raise up is trying to really rework your units to meet students where they are. So I think historically also colleges have had played a role of you come to us, you change to our culture, as opposed to saying who are our students and what culture do we need to create for you to succeed? So I think we heard a little bit about that with the cultural work. One I'll raise is our campus ministry program. We've been blessed with some significant grants from the Lilly Foundation and a few others to adapt our campus ministry activities. We're a Catholic institution, so instead of our primarily white roots and more from Northern European cultural approaches to religious practices, we need to adapt because our population is different and reorient that work to address that. So that's a few examples.
Yeah, great. So I think we all recognize historical, structural, cultural barriers to success for, a full range of students, but there are specific ones for Hispanic students. So can we address some of those, Montserrat?
Yes, absolutely. So when we look at the Hispanic community, we have the lowest college attainment. So what's going to happen with those students is that they tend to be the first in their families to attend college. They don't see themselves necessarily represented in the leadership in higher education or the leadership in the community, or in Austin, where I'm coming from, in the tech companies. We don't have that representation, so they don't see clearly that path forward. And that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to retain them and to be able to graduate and help them to be marketable. The bar, for the most part, tends to be set up for them low. And in Austin, where we tend to think of that community as the community that we need for the low skills type of positions in manufacturing. But when we think about the tech companies, for the most part, we're importing the talent to the point that in Austin, we have seen, despite the fact of the growth that we are seeing in the Hispanic community in Texas, that is the largest demographic group, in Austin has decreased over the last decade. So as a result, those students don't have the social network that they need to be successful, but they are our future, unquestionably. So it's important that as part of the education that we provide, beyond helping them to develop the competencies and the skills that they need to be successful, that we are able to partner internships are incredibly powerful for our students because then they start developing that confidence. And again, they don't see themselves represented there, but they start to develop a sense of belonging to in that role that is new to them and to their families. So we're using education not just to elevate those students, but their families and the communities that they represent. But we cannot do it alone. We need to partner with the community, and we need to partner with the tech companies, certainly in Austin and here in the Silicon Valley too.
Glena, let me get back to you. I know you've talked about some issues of representation on your campus that Monse mentioned. Can you expand?
Sure. So I'll just raise up another portion of representation. Dominicans' demographics change quite rapidly, and I think we're all very proud that we like to keep our employees for a long time, and board members serve for 12, 16 years. So Dominican has gone from 15, 20% Latina in our entering freshman class to 70%, as I mentioned, but that means the board needs to change, our administration needs to change, our senior leaders, our faculty, and at small private schools, that's much harder than it sounds when we tend to think of employment for life. But it is very important, and it's very important, and none of my board members are in the room, but to get them to identify that the board needs to change as well, not just in the race and ethnicity of the board, but their approach to the work also.
Krista, I know you've had some interesting issues with thinking about Hispanic students as a homogenous group, right? And they're not necessarily so. So are there specific things that you're having to deal with?
Well, our students realized that themselves. They had started a student group with the name Ondele that really represented typically the Mexican-American students, but as they started to learn their own student body, they came to understand that we had a significant number of students from Cuba and students from other Latin American countries and such, and they actually went back and did some thinking and changed their own student name, organizational name, and looked at how they could change the structure of their meetings, the representation of their cultures and such to be more inclusive as they went through that. And that was really great to see, and having them then come and talk to our staff and faculty about that, I think helped everybody to raise awareness that our culture is much more heterogeneous than we had originally thought, and how wonderful that is. And so they really took the lead.
Yeah. So, Krista, I'm wondering if you think things are different for Hispanic students on a small independent college campus versus, say, a large public institution, and how does that experience differ for them?
I would say that I think for our campus, and you see this, I would say, at a number of small campuses, it is easier to find community. It is easier to find organizations. We have a structure where if you get 3 people together and you want to start an organization, you can start an organization, and that's great. But it means that there's a lot of little organizations, and sometimes you become so segmented that you lose a bit of that sense of community. So I will say that in terms of being at a larger campus, like a large public where I went, I think it's much easier to find your community. The double-edged sword of that is that if you don't find your community at a small campus where everybody else is finding a place to fit in, I don't know if there's a lonelier place to be. And I think that becomes very challenging. So understanding that there are other ways of bringing students together, other interest groups. We do a lot of students empowering peers. It's called our STEP program. We do a first-year journey program where they go out camping together. We found that some of those bring students in when they might not want to join a cultural organization, for example, and that helps, but I don't think it fits for everybody.
Yeah. So I'd like us to delve into this idea of community, because I think it's particularly interesting in this environment. And so what I'm really curious about is how we're using technology or relationships with tech industry or industry in general in your communities to help build a sense of community for your Hispanic students, like give them bridges to the things that they need. Montserrat, I know you've talked about this a little bit.
Yes, and I want to talk about it from the perspective, maybe one, the access to technology, and then the opportunities to partner really with our tech world. One of the things that we're able to observe during the pandemic, the difficulties, in particular these communities that we serve, our Hispanic Latino communities, with access to the internet or access to computing, the tools that they needed to be successful. And we have to be mindful about that as we continue advancing in higher education and depending on partnering more closely, using technology as a powerful tool to really advance our ability to reach all the students. So the difficulty that those students may have to access technology, and as a result, they could be left behind. So we have to be very mindful as we integrate more the technology in our classroom that we can reach a lot of the students. But what I wanted to emphasize is how important to come together, to partner together, technology and higher education, because that's the path for the future. How can we do that? When we are talking about the Latino students, they don't see themselves represented in that tech role. So by default, they might not pursue that path. And it's important that we really are able to develop them into the future that we need, the future leaders in technology, the future leaders of our community. So a powerful way to get there is offering those opportunities as part of the training, working together so they benefit from an education that really integrates that learning in the classroom with the opportunities to put that knowledge into practice. Internships, experiential learning, but with great intentionality. For these students, when we put the internships in front of them, they would not pursue them because it's not really an option for them unless they are paid and unless they are already integrated in the curriculum. They have a great sense of responsibility of family, they work, so it really, and they tend to be the first in their family, so they wouldn't necessarily see the value, and even if it's explained to them, it's not an option. So what we are doing is integrating that in the curriculum. If we value those opportunities, those experiences, that's part of the training that we offer. So they have the mentorship from the faculty as part of the training. And we are partnering with the tech companies in Austin and beyond to make sure that they are thinking of our students as the future. So it's a really great partnership of mutual interest because, again, these students are our future. And they really understand how we need to evolve. They are Generation Z. We need to understand how the business can respond to the demands, the expectations of this generation. But they are very driven, and we really want to make sure that the education that we are providing, we are doing that in an integrated manner. So I would ask for the opportunities to work together, to think of these students as our future, and to start providing those opportunities for paid internships really integrated in the curriculum, in the training that we offer.
Glena, tell us about NowPow, right?
Sure. So I think in an interesting space where we differ from some small liberal arts colleges, many of our students commute, right? So a lot of the literature and a lot of the sense of retention and community is harder to apply because it's not necessarily a residential experience. And I think for many of our Latino students, community extends to their family, right? So while we need to build community on campus, we also need to include a sense or acknowledgement of the families involved in the role. So one way we've approached this work at Dominican is we took a tool from the University of Chicago, and we were the first higher ed institution to implement this. And what this tool does is it helps identify resources from where the students' families are, whether that be food needs, housing needs, transportation, financial aid, healthcare, immigration services, you name it. This tool connects those resources not on the Dominican campus, but through nonprofits in the community. Because of course, identifying most of our students don't live on campus. And if their family is in crisis, it doesn't matter if we solve it just for the student, right? We have to really identify that it's the entire family that could be struggling with that. So of course we provide some of those services, mental health, right, all of those on campus, but we've really taken the approach that the better long-term solution and the better sustainable solution is working with community partners and helping the family thrive along with our students. And that's a technology-based approach that's proven to be really useful for us at Dominican.
Yeah. Krista, tell us about the potential for technology for belonging with what you're doing. You had some interesting ideas.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things that are helping. One is, in addition to the counseling center that we're offering on campus, we've gone to an online 24/7 that helps with those crisis moments. But what we've found that's really interesting is that we're seeing more male students, particularly men of color, who are willing to use that online counseling service where they've not been willing to walk into our on-campus service. And so we think that that's helping with retention. Of course, we're using some of the retention software. One of the things that I'm really excited about is we've long had a spatial studies program through this Geographic Information Systems with Esri. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, how many of you during the pandemic looked at the Johns Hopkins pandemic website that shows you how it was spreading and such? That's all based off of that software, right? So that's the kind of spatial studies that we teach. Well, our local community library is using that software to map the historic Hispanic families within our community. You can drop in pictures and then drop in their oral history that they've been collecting. And so they've been working with our students so that our students feel a sense of pride, of place, and community, and then they're applying that into their actual undergraduate or graduate studies work, which is a really nice thing. But I think the thing that I'm excited about for the future is, we're adding esports, which can bring its own sense of community, but you will get a chance if you're here. I think they offered you the opportunity to go look at Dreamscapes. Did you all see that? How many of you are doing that or have done it? Okay, so I would encourage you to do this. This is a virtual reality. Dreamscapes is an offshoot of DreamWorks, the movie company that you've all seen. But they're developing a biology program, and they put it on another planet. And the reason that they did that, because I thought, why would you make everybody go to another planet with fake animals and solve fake world problems when we've got enough problems here that we could be working on, right? And their point was it actually got people more involved, and it leveled the playing field because nobody could walk in with, well, my dad's a veterinarian, so I know we should be looking at this renal issue, or, well, I've got this kind of animal, so we should look at this. And so they all came in on a level playing field, which doesn't happen in our systems very often. And I really think that there are new ways of learning out there that help to level the playing field for all of us, so students feel like, I know as much walking into this as anybody else, and then they became more engaged in that process. And so I think there's some really exciting opportunities on the horizon.
Yeah, I think the great promise of this conference is collaboration, right? It's getting different people together to come up with new ideas to solve problems. And I think to sort of help push that along for this group in serving Hispanic students, I'd like you to think about how you prioritize things on your campus and how you operationalize what you're doing. What is sort of the thing that came first for you in serving Hispanic student needs, and then maybe what are the next things that you need to do? So Glena, why don't we start with?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of reorientation that needs to happen when you make a shift like Dominican has made with such a change in demographics over 10 years. So, and again, I'll acknowledge we're still making some of those steps. So again, from the asset-based approach I talked about, having Hanaro, our vice president, is here. He had to hire a significant number of bilingual staff, Spanish-speaking staff, to help the families, help the students orient. And we've had a number of federal grants to support our HSI status. And I think the caution I will give to folks, they were really great in helping stand up different services and supports over the last 10 years, but we've created a cycle where they are very siloed. So how you get those units coordinated and talking together is a real problem for us at Dominican. And so now I think the work we're doing is try to have a very influential office that's the Office of HSI Initiatives, so that it can come from a data-centered, coordinated place instead of biology doing this and financial aid doing that and registrar not doing anything, and someone who can look at this more holistically across the space. But I will say I have to give tremendous credit to the team that came before me and the former President Donna Carroll to start that work to put individual initiatives in place. But it gets quite disjointed if you don't have an integrated data-driven approach to make this consistent across campus. So that's where Dominican is.
Yeah, yeah. So, Monty, I know you emphasize retention and graduation, and using tracking success for Hispanic students through retention and graduation. But can you tell us a little bit about that? But also how you assess that? How are you? What kind of data are you using for that?
So I think that one of the most important things in serving the Hispanic students is the intentionality and the accountability when we work with them. Because again, even if we bring the opportunities to them, they may not be in a position to pursue them. That's why we are seeing, again, nationwide, a significant gap in the context of being able to retain the students, in the context of being able to graduating the students. So what we are doing is ensuring that we have the infrastructure to support the students. How are we able to retain them when they need to see the value? They need to understand that higher education is a good home for them. They need to understand that when they graduate, they are going to be able to support their families. One of the main challenges in being able to retain those students is that they are presented with opportunities for employment during their time with us that will lead to opportunities primarily in manufacturing that will lead to, for them, a venue to be able to support their families. So they need to see the value of an education, and we need to focus on the development of the workforce and the job placement. So a significant effort has been not just in retaining and graduating them, but to ensure that the education leads to job placement and stability, financial stability for them and for their families. So to be able to do that, we really need to think about everything. They need to have the internships, but it's not even just the presenting the internships for them. We need to make sure that we have the transportation for them. So we really need to, again, bring great intentionality and accountability to ensure that the education really leads to a life of enrichment and fulfillment. The metrics that we use to characterize, to be able to understand, we are successful in delivering that truly transformative educational experience. It's a lot of personalized service, so we keep track of them, what they are doing, where they are, how we are serving them. Each one of them would have, beyond the advising and the support from the faculty, they have a coach. If you're in athletics, you know what a coach is. The coach will be with you through the entire journey. So each student will be assigned a success coach. And that individual, the success coach, will keep track, not just the academics, but the engagement with the community, the opportunities for that student to really make sure that our institution is a good home for them. So a lot of data analytics, a lot of integration, again, of the educational experience, technology, and the paths for the future, but we are keeping track, too, of the demand that we have in our community, the workforce. So more emphasis on that workforce development. So that's why we partner very closely with tech, with healthcare, just to make sure that we focus on those outcomes to ensure the success of our students. But I would say the key is the intentionality and the accountability with those students.
And Krista, I know you're using bridge programs and things like that.
Yeah, we are. We're using a summer bridge program, and then one of the things that we've been doing is, building in more, Hispanic culture with that, and Spanish speaking in our orientation, making sure that's available in our student financial services, and then really looking at the first year journey program. So this outdoor education program that starts a week or so before classes, where they go out in these different groups that are student-led groups. We don't go with them at all, no faculty, no staff. Our students are trained in outdoor education and first aid, and then we just pray that they come back. They've had some really interesting experiences, but boy, do they form community. I mean, it's nothing like fighting off a deer that attacks you, or getting food poisoning together to form a real sense of community when you come back together. But again, it's that peer program as well. And then I would say that, one of the things, we're newer to this than my colleagues, and so we've been really intentional about adding diversity on our board. And so not just in terms of Hispanic representation or BIPOC representation, but also in terms of the different programs. Non-traditional students, students who came in for degree completion who are also Hispanic, first in their family and such, and then helping them make those connections. Our board established its own Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and they've been intentional at every board meeting. They bring in a speaker or they specifically focus on training for the board on that topic. And sometimes that means bringing in our own students to talk about their experience so that the board can think about things we need to be doing better to improve that experience and holding ourselves accountable. And so I think that's been really helpful both to form connections and then to see the commitment. Sometimes it breaks down those barriers, right? We get some board members who go, well, what does equity mean? Does that mean lowering test scores and making it easier? And what we have to say is, no, equity means meeting each of our students where they are. And we get to define that for our campus. And how do we make sure that every student is successful to the extent that we are able, knowing that they have their own personal responsibility? And so sometimes breaking it down to our commitment to our students versus the national noise about this issue of anti-woke or whatever helps to get them refocused on what we're doing and committed to doing that work in an appropriate way.
Yeah, yeah. Wonder if we can digitally replicate a deer attack for building community. Is that a possibility? Get our tech folks on that. So I'd like you all to think about the assumption of this session, where we're actually thinking about Hispanic students as a sought-after student population, right? And I think a group that can help us expand in a time when we're facing sort of a demographic cliff. Mm-hmm. So I'd like each of you to sort of address that a little bit. Monse, can you tell us?
We are seeing a decrease in the context of the the body graduating from high school, but we are seeing the growth in the Hispanic community. So I do want to emphasize that they are our future. And one of the greatest joys of my job is that I see them every day, and they inspire me. They are so driven. They want to make a difference. They want to move forward with environmental, social impact, and we just want to empower them to do so. They are there, and they keep growing. So we want to make sure that we continue investing in the Hispanic Latino human capital, because they are our tomorrow, the future leaders of our community, of our world, and it's really wonderful to see that the future is in their hands, because the future is going to be bright. But we all need to really think of them at the highest levels as leaders and start building those opportunities for them to get there. Because, again, they are the ones that are going to lead this country, our nation, and higher education, tech companies. So let's all invest in that future.
Yeah, Krista, some thoughts on this?
I totally agree. I've been blown away by our Hispanic students, our first-generation students who are graduating. I've got one graduating with 3 majors: global business, Asian studies, and marketing. And this is a first-generation student who is a transfer student, who came with, everything against him, and he has just made huge strides. And not only that, but he's coming to my office and sitting down and going, you need to be doing more for first-generation students and Hispanic students, and have you looked at this program, and have you looked at this program, and this is where you failed me, and you need to do better here. And he's right. And so I think if we give our students space and voice, and empower them, they tell us often what they need and where we need to do better by them. And we should listen to them. I think that they're onto something, and they do great things.
Yeah, Glena.
Sure, and I agree with my colleagues. I'm going to call out to the individuals who don't work in higher ed in the room for this example. So as I gave the example before, that many primarily white institutions at times can say, you must adjust to us. In my experience in going out and meeting with a lot of the large businesses in Chicago who want to diversify their workforce, so they look at us and say, how do we partner? But when I point out to them that their traditional summer internship program doesn't really work for our students, they look at me awkwardly, right? And I say, well, our students can't quit their job and do an 8-week intensive and not have that guaranteed income coming back. They might not have the transportation to your downtown office, the clothes, the culture, all of those pieces. So when I look at some of these businesses and say, because they'll say, we have a diversity summer internship program, I'll say, not good enough, right? Again, these companies have to help meet our students where they are also, if they're serious about this work. So I would call on the folks in the room to help create that importance of, we gotta do these things differently. And we, colleges, can work with you. We can help with the job placements on the edges of that. We can help solve some of the transportation and some of the issues and help prepare for the culture shock that might exist when they get to a company. So, a quick story of, we heard from one student who went to the first day of their summer internship, and the company took them to this restaurant in a very uncomfortable setting with no diversity represented, and the conversations that they didn't feel at all comfortable with, and that student didn't want to continue. Just by the choice of what that first day, and that person thought they were doing this wonderful thing by taking them to this fantastic restaurant in Chicago, but they instantly made the student feel not comfortable, not welcome, not valued in the system. So my call out to the companies of, if you're serious about this work and want our first generation students and some of our Latinx students, got to change how you do some of the work with us as well to be able to go forward.
Fantastic. So we're going to break the rules a little bit and see if you all have any questions. And I'm going to come to you.
Thank you. So as a Latina myself, I'm curious to hear if you have specific targeted programs that target Hispanics or Latino students with their intersectionalities. And what they mean by that, what about your LGBT who are Latinos? What about Latinos with disabilities? What about something that I'm very passionate about, like children or young adults who have an incarcerated parent, because that just changes the dynamic about what it means to be Latino. So I celebrate the first generation, that's great. But I always tell the joke, like, I didn't become Latino until I came to live in this country, right? I was just like, oh, I'm Latina, I'm Colombian, and nobody had told me. So I'm curious to hear about that diversification within the diverse Latino population that goes beyond country of origin.
The intersectionality is very important to acknowledge that, and I'm very fortunate to be part of a community that truly celebrates that. And we meet each student where they are, and we celebrate for who they are, and they make us better. So here we are focusing on what it really means, that identity, but that identity means diversity. So we certainly are a safe, welcoming, a very inclusive campus community, and we do have a lot of different organizations that the students led. For instance, they're leading, for instance, the Monarchs on campus, which is support for undocumented students, LGBTQ. So we have groups that is also a safe environment where they can be, and we engage them in their own terms too, beyond all the different layers of support that we have. Again, we really bring intentionality in how we support them, but most importantly, we celebrate every day the diversity that they bring. And even just within just the Latino community, there is great diversity of nationalities and identities. And in many cases, we highlight so much the differences that we don't gain that united voice that makes it more difficult to advance. So we try to really ensure that, yes, we are all different, but we come together with a common desire that is just to really empower these amazing students that are the future that we need.
And I'll just add to that, I agree. Our Vice President for Student Success and Engagement has taken the approach of a Center for Cultural Liberation where all identities are celebrated. So we actually don't have a Latino center and break out the different race and ethnicities, and instead a unified center that approaches the multiple identities that a student will bring and understands them from a whole perspective. So, and I think we have an extension of that with our families program as well, but not separated by different categories of the approach. But your point is well taken, right? Of the work ahead of us. So.
Yeah. So we have time for one more, I think.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Linda Vasquez. I work for the California Community Colleges. I'm also a doctoral student pursuing my dissertation in higher ed governance. One, I just want to say how amazing it is to see a panel of women. We just had celebrated Women's History Month, so thank you. Thank you for moderating. This is sort of like a rapid fire question. What are the top 3 ways your institution is utilizing federal funding from being a Hispanic serving institution to supporting Hispanic student success? Because it's more than just a designation and being Hispanic serving. How do you use those funds to support student success?
I can go first. We have a lot of federal grants, so it's I could probably give you 10. But our most recent HSI grant, Career Services, purposeful holistic advising, I'll put it in that category that falls into peer mentoring, and the Office of HSI that's taking a data-driven approach. So our latest federal grant had those 3 priorities, but I would say most of our federal grants go around student support. So advising, peer mentoring, career services, financial aid, that's where the majority of our federal dollars go.
So I would say, we're getting our first one, but the way that we are directing it is to lift up our current successful high-impact practices and then expanding and thinking about how we do that better, particularly for intersectionality and our Latina population. And so that would be the focus area, because we're very siloed already, and I'm very guarded against becoming more siloed by trying to create an HSI Excellence Center, something along that lines. And so, trying to learn from this conversation as well. I keep saying that my goal is to put the UNA back in university and to try to break down those silos and the bounce rates. And so part of that will go to a one-stop shop, making sure everybody there is bilingual as well, and just trying to make sure we're doing this in ways that are more welcoming and doing outreach to the community.
Montse, very quick last word. So.
Just one example is to introduce the students to research, in particular the undergraduate students. If they are new to higher education, they are first generation in college, so the path of graduate education is certainly new to them. So some recent funding is to make them aware and to help them to believe in themselves and to prepare them to pursue graduate education or a path for research.
Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it.